Welcome to the Interchange at UCF, a video podcast about interfaith exploration. Today's discussion has been brought to you by the al-Ghazali program in Islamic Studies at UCF. I am Cyrus Zargar. Joining me is the Assistant Chair of the Department of Philosophy and co-founder of the Interfaith Dialogue program at UCF, Dr. Christy Flanagan-Feddon. Our esteemed guest today is Dr. Milad Milani. Dr. Milani is a senior lecturer in religious studies at Western Sydney University and a school-based member of the Institute for Culture and Society. He leads the Humanities Religious Studies Research Collective within the School of Humanities Communication Arts and is co-lead of the Sufi Studies Network at Monash University. He serves on the editorial board of the journal Sophia and is co-editor of the Journal for the Academic Study of Religion. From 2023 to 2025, he served as president of the Australian Association for the Study of Religion. Dr. Milani is an internationally recognized expert in the study of religion with a focus on Islam and Sufism. He's also a philosopher, a very gifted writer. He's the author of The Nature of Sufism, an ontological reading of the mystical in Islam, which is our focus today. Dr. Milani will be giving us a short 25-minute introduction to the topic of Jesus and Islamic mysticism, and then Dr. Flanagan-Feddon and I will be asking him questions for about 15 minutes after that, and then we'll open it up to your questions. You can see there's a Q&A box. That's where you should put your questions. Then you can upvote questions that you'd like to see answered, and we'll answer them we'll try to answer those that have the most upvotes first. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Milani.
Thank you so much, Cyrus, for that introduction. You're very kind. And Christy, also, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor for me and a privilege. And if I may, I'll begin with my introduction to this session, and then hopefully we can have some nice conversation and question and answer time as well. I decided, for reasons that will become clear in a moment, to begin my introduction with reading a passage from the Surah of Maryam in the Quran. So, if you don't mind, I'll just start sort of partway through that at the necessary, the relevant section. And you shall recount in the book the story of Mary, how she left her people and betook herself to a solitary place to the east. We sent to her our spirit in the semblance of a full-grown man, and when she saw him, she said, "May the merciful defend me from you. If you fear the Lord, leave me and go your way." "I am but your Lord's emissary," he replied, "and have come to give you a holy son." "How shall I bear a child," she answered, "when I have neither been touched by any man, nor ever been unchaste?" "Thus did our Lord speak," he replied. "That is easy enough for me. He shall be a sign to mankind, and a blessing from ourselves. Our decree shall come to pass." Thereupon she conceived him and retired to a far-off place. And when she felt the throes of childbirth, she lay down by the trunk of a palm tree, crying, "Oh, would that I had died before this and passed into oblivion." But a voice from below cried out to her, "Do not despair. Your Lord has provided a brook that runs at your feet, and if you shake the trunk of the palm tree, it will drop fresh ripe dates in your lap. Therefore eat and drink and rejoice. And should you meet any mortal, say to him, I have vowed a fast to the merciful and will not speak with any man today." Carrying the child, she came to her people, who said to her, "Mary, this is indeed a strange thing. Sister of Aaron, your father was never a whoremonger, nor was your mother a harlot." She made a sign to them, pointing to the child. But they replied, "How can we speak with a babe in the cradle?" Whereupon he spoke and said, "I am the servant of God. He has given me the book and ordained me a prophet. His blessing is upon me wherever I go, and he has exhorted me to be steadfast in prayer and to give alms as long as I shall live. He has exhorted me to honor my mother and has purged me of vanity and wickedness. Blessed was I on the day I was born, and blessed I shall be on the day of my death, and on the day I shall be raised to life. Such was Jesus, son of Mary. That is the whole truth, which they still doubt. God forbid that he himself should beget a son. When he decrees a thing, he need only say, be, and it is. I'm going to stop there. And the reason that I read, there's two reasons why I read this. And of course, as we know, Jesus appears many times throughout the Quran, but his story is captured notably in the Surah Maryam. And so I read this first because it is obviously one of the most preeminent chapters of the Quran. There's much to be said about the meaning of the chapter as a whole. Suffice to say that it's a key chapter that emphasizes divine mercy, hope, and spiritual strength in the face of adversity by discussing numerous prophets. Relevant to us, of course, is the section on Mary and Jesus, and this is from Surah 19, 16 to 36 that I read. The narrative in this chapter turns on the miraculous virgin birth of Jesus and follows with the newborn speaking from the cradle to defend his mother against slander and to set the record straight concerning his status in the service of God. The historical background to the surah is also significant, I think, revealed before the first migration to Abyssinia. It becomes a source of consolation and strength during a time of intense persecution. The opening verses that address Mary and Jesus were famously recited to the Christian king when the fate of the refugees, of course, hung in the balance. Now, my interest in the chapter is as a comparativist. I am interested in not only points of similarity, but of course of difference. This I see as critical not only to our understanding of historical reality, but also the integrity of faith traditions as they are sustained through time. Now, the second reason that I read this, that I opened with this reading, is to discuss Jesus. In order to discuss Jesus in Sufism, it is necessary to recall the Quranic narrative, and in particular this one. Now, as an example of Jesus in Sufism proper, I'd like to tell a short, just recount, paraphrase, summarize a very short story about Jesus from the Musibat Nameh of Attar. And this is from anecdote 15:1. So this is just my rough summary, so please bear with me, just for us to get the gist of it. It goes something like this. As Jesus, radiant, filled with light, walked along the path, a man joins him. And Jesus carried with him 3 loaves of bread. He eats one, he gives one to his companion, and then leaves the third. Now, while Jesus goes away for a moment to fetch water or something, the man secretly eats the remaining loaf. Now, when Jesus comes back, he asks about the loaf, but the man denies any knowledge of it. As they journey, Jesus performs miracle after miracle to stir the man's conscience. He walks with him on water. He revives a slaughtered gazelle that they eat, and then Jesus gathers the bones and breathes on them, and they come to life again, and the gazelle gallops off. And finally, turns 3 heaps of dust into mountains of gold. And each time, Jesus asks the man who ate the bread, and in return, the man continually denies or persists in his denial. Now, only when the gold appeared did greed overwhelms him to such an extent that the man ultimately confesses. Because Jesus offers up the gold to the one who ate the bread in secret. And he confesses that he ate the bread. He was the one who ate it in secret. So Jesus renounces at that moment both the man and the gold and leaves him behind. What happens next is interesting. So soon after, the two other men discover the treasure. Now, all three men fight each other violently. And then ultimately, when they get tired of fighting, they agree to share the gold equally. Now, but they're hungry at this point, and the original companion of Jesus says he'll go to town and fetch some bread. But in secret, he schemes to poison the bread when he brings it back, and to in order to kill the other two men, and keep all the gold for himself. But of course, the two men also plot to kill him on his return and keep the gold for themselves. But the ultimate end of the story is that their treachery destroys all of them. So the pair of men who lie in wait kill the man who comes back with the bread, and when they eat the bread, they die of poison. Now, when Jesus returns on the scene again, he finds the three corpses beside the gold. And at that moment, he declares that wealth could cause endless bloodshed if left in the world, and prayed until the gold turned back into dust. Gold, he said, is more deadly than dust. Let it lie beneath the earth, not above it. And that's how the story goes. This didactic tale is well known in Sufi literature. Similar ideas appear often in, for example, Rumi's Masnavi. But it's not so much the rich symbolic meaning of the story I am interested in, as you may have guessed, but the ontology of Jesus in Sufi literature. That is, the deeper meaning of what Jesus stands for in Sufi imagination. So in my book, The Nature of Sufism, as kindly Cyrus mentioned, I present the idea that if we assess the presence and absence of Jesus, we can derive an interesting correlation between when Jesus is used, and when, as in the term is used, utilized, and when love, ishq, is present or presented, in particular in Persian Sufi poetry. Now, this correlation is not unusual as much as it is unorthodox, and I acknowledge that, in the way that Jesus is normally read in Sufism. So normally Jesus is an archetype of spiritual insight and detachment, and I sort of sheepishly say that he's kind of like a super dervish. His prophethood is emphasized, as well as his asceticism and sainthood as a renunciate. Now, equally, his performance of miracles is displayed and represents the inner world of religion and wisdom. In Sufi stories, then, Jesus serves as a revealed guide, if you like, who reminds those whom he encounters about the hidden reality of God behind the veil of existence, and also about the human obsession with materiality, as we saw in the story. The figure of Jesus also reminds readers of the potentiality for the soul's rebirth by abandoning a life of falsehood. Upon reflection, I think it's important to underline this is really something quite extraordinary that we find in the literature about Jesus. In his companionship to humankind, as he is reflected in the stories, he is the symbol of the Spirit of God, the perfected Master, and the friend of God. In short, he is the light-filled mirror for the path of the heart, who embodies divine spirit, purity, and uncompromising truth. So I raised the question in my book that Jesus in Sufism can also be read as an experience. And I qualify this term and its use in relation to Jesus within the context of Sufism, of course, at great detail in the book, but here time is brief. So if we read it read him as an experience that is quite regularly encapsulated by the notion of love, ishq, in Sufi literature. In the Bible, for example, Jesus is the ultimate manifestation of God's love. In the Quran, he is said to be a sign of God. Now, these ideas are, of course, not equivalent in their theological value across the two texts, but they do point to an interesting possibility in Sufi poetry concerning the centrality of love, ishq. Love is not just a central theme in Sufism, but often portrayed more than that as the very means of salvation. The force that draws the soul out of its estrangement and returns it to its divine source. For Sufi poets especially, love is treated as a transformative, redemptive, and ultimately salvific presence. I deliberately use strong language here because ishq in Sufism is not just an emotion or virtue, it is the very engine of salvation in that very context. It is precisely that which awakens the soul, purifies it, draws it to God, and ultimately unites it with the beloved. One could say that without ishq, there is no journey. With it, salvation is not only possible, but inevitable. Now, this does have some resonance with the Johannine narrative, as in the Gospel of John, the narrative of the Gospel of John, about Jesus and God's love. Now, John's Gospel equates Jesus with divine love to such an extent that, academically speaking, we may say God, Jesus, and love become synonymous as salvific tropes in Christian understanding. But of course, we have to remember that theologically, for the faithful, these are indeed the essential components of salvation itself and not merely symbols of it. For us, or rather at least for my argument, the point is that this is an idea that has immense carryover. It is contagious, in my view, because it is deeply touching, emotionally captivating, spiritually compelling, and I believe intellectually magnetic. It creates the possibility of speaking about a kind of quote-unquote Jesus experience, yet one that is, I would caution, for the purposes of academic work, far removed from the Christian theological context. So I'm not trying to conflate the two. This experience, it's pervasive within the Sufi mystical setting, and it brings to bear a charismatic feeling in the Islamic context that is shaped by the Sufis or channeled by the Sufis in a way. So as I say, this is expanded upon quite at great length in the book, but here I give it to you in brief. Now, the second component to my argument is, in this kind of strain of thought here, it comes from the inspiration that I draw from is the conversion of Paul. And the conversion of Paul is a classic example of conversion, and I'm referring to Acts 9. Paul, before his conversion, as most of you would know, was a Pharisee and a zealous persecutor of the early Christian community. His conversion is considered, however, a mystical experience. And his epistles relay the same mode of interaction with Jesus that speaks about an inward experiential relationship with him, which is enabled by the presence of the Holy Spirit that allows this mystical union to occur. And this, again, is not the same thing as what is happening in Sufism, simply because Paul is a missionary and his mysticism is outward-facing, propelling the power of his ministry. But one might argue that it gives us another vital point of consideration about the charismatic nature of a distinctive mystical experience and teaching that suggests, ever so carefully, the possibility of intimacy with and transformation through God. So profoundly felt is this in the Sufi imagination, in my view, and Persian mystical poetry, that we read the following line, for example, in Hafez. And I have the Persian here as well, if you'd like me to read the Persian, but the English goes something like, were the Holy Spirit to favor us once more by its grace, others too would perform all the works of Christ. Now, all this aside, we cannot help but inevitably turn our attention back to Muhammad's role in the mystical tradition, in the Sufi tradition, in the Sufi imagination, because the Sufi tradition overwhelmingly elevates Muhammad above all as the source of salvation. There is no dispute that the place of Muhammad al-Mustafa, the chosen one, is at the pinnacle of Sufi achievement. In Sufi consciousness, one might say, generally speaking, becoming the seminal servant, the lowest of the low, is to rise to the highest station of spiritual attainment. Indeed, Quran 61:6 has Jesus as herald to the coming of Ahmad. And so Atta has Jesus say, quote, I who came to bring glad tidings of Muhammad, yet even in that I fell short. And this is again from Musibat Nameh, line 58, 72. In short, we cannot doubt the superiority of Muhammad in the Sufi imagination. And Jesus' statement is indeed a confession of inadequacy on the part of the Muslim Jesus that acknowledges Muhammad as the perfected one and the one who fulfills the perfect and perfects all. Muhammad by necessity takes center stage in the Sufi imagination, but he does so through a hermeneutical transformation. And this is the crucial part. Now, Muhammad in Sufi imagination functions not only as a historical prophet, but as a cosmic, metaphysical, and mystical reality. Briefly, the outlines of this transformation are related to 5 key aspects that are attributed to Muhammad in Sufism, which historically evolve and come to bear on the poetic imagination of Atta, Rumi, and Jami, for instance. Now, I'll quickly, very briefly, list the 5, and this is that the ontological aspect of Muhammad relates to his being the primordial light, Nur Muhammadi, the first manifestation of God. The cosmic aspect, the second, is Muhammad as axis of creation, that is the mediating principle between God and world. The epistemological aspect reflects Muhammad as mirror of divine knowledge and locus of revelation. The ethical has him as the model of perfection for human transformation. And finally, the mystical aspect reveals him as the beloved through whom the seeker attains annihilation and union. Now, this is beautifully conveyed in a touching story about King Mahmud and his slave Ayaz, so commonly present in, say, for example, in Sufi literature generally, but in the Musibat Nameh of Attar, of course. And there's a beautiful version of this story in anecdote 30.6, where King Mahmud is, and again, I'm trying to summarize this very quickly. King Mahmud is out hunting on his horse and he's chasing a prey that's fleeing away from him, and Ayaz becomes suddenly breaks into tears. And when the king asks, why are you weeping? Ayaz confesses that his jealousy wells up in him so much that the ruler is pursuing what refuses him. He reproaches Mahmud for desiring a creature that fled from the sovereign's majesty. Mahmud explains he rides to capture and kill the game, but Ayaz his jealousy only intensifies, and he begs the king to hunt him instead. When Mahmud says he wants to kill the beast to eat it, Ayaz answers with still greater fervor and says, if the king will make Ayaz his food, then Ayaz's lowly self would be consumed and he would be reborn as Mahmud. And that, he says, would satisfy him. The exchange closes on this extravagant declaration of devotion where Ayaz prefers to be utterly lost in the king, even at the cost of his own life, rather than see the king desire anything that resists him. Now, in Atta's Musibat Name, King Mahmud and Ayaz are, as I said, recurrent figures, and the stories are quite repetitive, but they symbolize, I think, an intimate relationship between the divine and the servant. Reading Mahmud as symbolic figure of the Prophet Muhammad and Ayaz as the archetypal lover or Sufi aspirant is also possible and arguably consistent with classical Sufi modes of allegory. So to close, and sort of this is the summary of my point here, where does this leave us in considering Jesus and Muhammad in the Sufi imagination? I assert that the preeminence of both figures is brought to bear on the spiritual significance of their role in Islamic consciousness, precisely as mystics, and this is an argument I make in the book. Yet we can rightly ask or question this. Are they really mystics? Can they be categorized as such? Now, I'd have to confess that neither Jesus nor Muhammad would arguably be, from a strict historical standpoint, correctly described as mystic. The Muhammad of tradition, the apostle of God, prophet of Islam, is certainly not a mystic, nor is Jesus, either in Islam or Christianity, a mystic. But of course, this is the question of how we categorize, how we define this category, how we explain this term. From a purely observatory point of view, it would even seem that attributing to them the category of mystic paradoxically relegates both to a lower standing than that ascribed to them by their respective creeds. But it is nevertheless, and at the very least, a literary reality that persists in the Sufi imagination. And to my mind, it represents what I've argued in the Nature of Sufism as the prime function of mystical Islam. That is, to become so established in the way as to go beyond both convention and category. I'll stop there.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. There's so much to talk about, actually, and unpack.
I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. So we'll, as I said before, we'll hopefully have some questions in the Q&A. Those of you who are participants, the Q&A function you see there is where you should share any questions you have, and they can be really general questions or specific questions. Don't be shy. But let's start. Dr. Flanagan-Feddon, would you like to take the first question?
Oh, if I take the first question, I'm going to take over the whole operation.
It'll be the last question.
But I'm happy to. Milad, I just want to thank you so much for your talk and how rich and robust these points are. And the only reason I was hesitant to ask the first question is because I fear that I will take over the questions because I have so much to say. But Dr. Zargar can limit me at any point if I just become too superfluous and exuberant. But I think one of the components that struck me so much from your text and that I appreciated it so much is that I really didn't, I'm coming at, as I mentioned before, I'm coming at this from a perspective of kind of post-Christian theology, that I'm very interested in figures, particularly from the 19th and 20th century, who are very much part of the Christian tradition, but offer a very robust critique of Christian orthodoxy. And I would argue, with the work that I do, that critique and that kind of heterodox reading is very much part and parcel to what entails Christian thought in the Christian tradition. And so I am right alongside of you in so much of what you say about the significance of Jesus as a figure for Sufism, because I think so much of how you describe Jesus is very near and dear to figures that are coming out of Christianity as well. And so there are just so many questions relating to orthodoxy and heterodoxy, orthopraxy, and also, what it means to have the mystical versus sort of the systematic and the rational. So I am abundant with questions, but I think the first point that I wanted to mention was just this, and I wanted to just read a quick passage. This is on page 101 from your book, The Nature of Sufism. And so you write that the Sufi reading of Jesus exemplifies the Christian articulation of the interplay between human divine relations through a variety of storyline templates that capture the archetypal message of unconquerable love as the principal commandment at the heart of religion. And then you reference this both to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And as I said, that this is a very significant part of your meditation on Sufism, and looking at this kind of Heideggerian reading of how we understand Sufism with relation to larger issues of Islam. But this emphasis on humanism and humanness of Jesus, again, this isn't just a Sufi reading, and this is foundational for an entire trajectory of Christian critique and philosophers engaged with Christianity. You mentioned Thomas Sheehan and his, and you talked here about, how Paul and the Pauline epistles are really kind of pivotal in, understanding Christian theology and kind of the establishment of the church. Others have made that observation too. Nietzsche said something extremely similar, perhaps in a bit more pejorative fashion, but he had a strong concern about, that moment and the writings of Paul of really kind of taking Christianity away from Christ, as he would say, and kind of limiting this notion of the human divine relation and the significance of Jesus as a figure. And I could just continue on about death of God theology that's inaugurated by Jesus. But I think what might the figures that I thought of that I think might be most significant and and offer the most parallels for what you're doing in this text with Sufism in particular is I thought of both Kierkegaard and Schleiermacher. And I thought especially, when you're talking again about the significance here in understanding, the kind of parabolic significance of Jesus and the role of Ishq and all of that is I thought so much of Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard's critique of Christendom is that, he fears that this authentic faith has been lost, that it's become established, it's become bourgeoisie, and that, the believer has lost this singular individual relationship with God. And, a bit before him, Schleiermacher said that, emphasizing, intuition and consciousness, that indeed we do that via, religions and religious traditions, but that it's so much more than that, where he said that in the religions, in terms of orthodoxy, you find religion, you find this larger consciousness like the opening. And so, again, there's so much that I could say, but I wonder, in this tension, and you're very, very, reasonable and humble to emphasize how you're offering, you're reading against the grain, you're not offering a theological interpretation, but to kind of link it back to Heidegger and kind of the Heideggerian method that is so much part of this. To what extent do you think kind of the worlding or the institutionalization that religious practice offers, to what extent does that limit our ability, do you think, to really engage in the mystical or in authentic religious practice?
Wow. I mean, everything you said, I would love to continue that conversation. And it's just so, everything you point out, it's so great. And the question is I guess, in a way, it, I guess, by referencing all the characters that you have, the answer is kind of going to be easily anticipated, because and I agree with you. I'm very much fond of Kierkegaard myself. I'm very fond of Nietzsche in particular, and of course the entire paradigm for my analysis has been to use a Heideggerian lens. And Heidegger, of course, as we know, is a thinker who is, in a way, very much shaped by what he reads in both Nietzsche and those before, like Kierkegaard, including. But in particular, Nietzsche, I think, and I think in a big way, Kierkegaard, they're probably not so emphasized. And so this kind of thinking has really been the tool by which I have been trying to shake the question of mysticism free from its conventional confines and to enable us to again revisit this question, sit with it, readdress the problematics of it, and think about it fresh, in a way that I would imagine Heidegger might do, right?
Mhm.
And I can just imagine him, doing that. So yeah, I think it kind of to be a little bit more assertive, I would say I think it's time. I think it's necessary now for us to rethink this question, for two reasons. One, I think it's absolutely fundamental to understanding religiosity, spirituality, but also I think it's fundamental. There's a fundamental issue that is at stake for us because it's become a little bit of a cliche as well. So when you talk about mysticism, people kind of gloss over and like, yeah, whatever. I've heard this 100,000 times. What does it even mean? So I think those are two very good reasons why we need to return to this question. And and really what I've tried to do is open up the question and problematize our way of thinking about it thus far. So to answer your question in a direct way, that was exactly what I'm trying to do.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, so actually, I have a lot of questions as well, but I honestly, these questions that we've gotten in the Q&A are so good that if you don't mind, Dr. Flanagan-Feddon and I, we can come back to our questions because I worry we'll run out of time and not get to the audience's questions. So if it's okay, I'll actually go ahead and change gears. We'll go to the audience's questions now because they're really excellent questions. And then if we have more time, Christy and I, we can bring our own questions in. Is that okay, Dr. Flanagan-Feddon, if we do that? Okay, because
They
they're
are very
really
good questions.
they're really good questions here. So here's the first. You had mentioned five aspects. I don't remember if it's five aspects about Jesus or was it five about Muhammad? You both. You did
Muhammad.
Muhammad. Yeah, Muhammad.
Yeah.
So in the five aspects that you mentioned, there was no political element. There was no mention of a political element. It could be that a broad understanding and practice of Sufism manifests a coherent political philosophy, but I am wondering, because you described, as was written, that Sufism understands Jesus as a figure of quote unquote love and Muhammad as a superior metaphysical force, are Sufis ambivalent toward political philosophies? Is it more an ascetic worldview? I could be wrong, but I have a sense that Islam is very forward about its political ambitions early on. So there is the question, the first
Yeah.
one.
Okay. These are good questions. So thank you for the question. And thank you for reading it out. Uh, I, so there is another book that that I have that's called Sufi Political Thought, and in that book, that was the whole journey, where I sat down and I thought to myself, right, I'm going to answer this question about Sufism and politics. Are Sufis political? Because obviously the sort of ordinary thinking about Sufism is more along the lines of spirituality, mysticism, aesthetics, maybe philosophy to some extent, but never really politics. In short, yeah, there's quite a lot of political engagement, and the politicization of Sufism is one thing. The polemics and political activity of Sufism is another thing. So Sufis, throughout time, there are instances of their political activity and involvement in historical events, and so on and so forth. So there's literal political activity. There is sort of polemic politicization of theology, dogmatics, creed, sort of debate, discussion. And there's also the politicization of the Sufis themselves and Sufism as a category in the usage of, say, contemporary politics, where Sufism is often presented as a panacea for all the problems in the world, or as sort of an antidote to violent extremism or something like this. So the utilization of Sufism can take those shapes, obviously. So I think I might
No, that's good. That's really
stop
good.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Here's another one.
Yeah.
How do scholars reconcile the dramatically different views of Jesus between Christian and Muslim texts? I heard a seminary professor comment a few years ago, the Quran and other Muslim writings mention someone called Jesus, but I think they have him confused with someone else. So there you go. I like that quote. They're going on another mention someone called Jesus, but I think they have him confused with someone else. Repeating the question, how do
Mm.
scholars reconcile the dramatically different views of Jesus between Christian and Muslim texts? How do they reconcile the fact that there are these two different versions of Jesus?
I presume by scholars is meant like us academics, so I'll just go with that.
Sure.
Obviously, as I was hopefully attempting to do in my short introduction, is to kind of make that distinction, as I referenced, obviously Surah Maryam, in which very clearly I read how Jesus is described and how Jesus describes himself in the Quran. But then also cited John's Gospel, not directly, of course, but paraphrasing in the way that Jesus features in the Gospels, in the New Testament. So the distinction, I think, in short, is clear, though I admit that in my exercising this problematization of mysticism, I have tried to some extent to blur the boundaries between these two, but within reason and with caution, and obviously for the sake of argument, not for the sake of conflating theologies. So they're not the same thing. Jesus in the Quran, as far as it goes, is mentioned as a sign and even as a word, and his virgin birth is recognized, and so on. And there are special kinds of terminology, phrasings around that, as I read from the Surah Maryam, which you can see where there may be points of correlation, points of connection, points of contention. But as I also read, it was very clear that he declares himself a prophet, and a man, and kind of sets the limitations and boundaries that then clearly distinguishes Jesus in the Quran from Jesus in the Bible. So, and these are obviously pertaining to notions of Christology, or the Christological debates about the nature of Jesus, incarnation, resurrection, and ascension, and so on. So,
Yeah, if I may,
yeah.
Milad, to some degree, I think you're also understating the really profound contribution of your work, because this actually ties to one of the questions I was going to ask you. This last question, which is, I mean, there is a degree to which what you're putting forward is that Christians, non-Muslims, anyone really could have an even more panoramic, more informed view of who Jesus is at this metaphysical level by learning about him through Sufism and Islam. Almost like if you were to see a close relative or a loved one through the window of someone else's house, and all of a sudden you see them in
Yeah.
this whole other place, in this whole other context, and it's someone you've known all your life, and because in a sense reminding them of what is sure inherent in their own tradition, but often forgotten. I mean, I don't know, what do you think of that? That's what I see in your book personally.
You're very kind. And I love your analogy, and I think that's I couldn't put it better myself. So
Thank you.
yeah, no, I agree.
Dr. Flanagan-Feddon, did you want to say something on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that was really the point that I was trying to make, in that, I think Dr. Milani's try. You like I said, you're very cautious and very gracious in saying, this is not a traditional theological reading of Jesus, but yet I would really press that, because maybe it's not not an orthodox reading, but it is 100% a reading that is coming out of post-Christian thought. And so I think it's and I would argue from some of the most significant thinkers in Christian thought and Christian philosophy of religion who call into question, when have Orthodox readings of Jesus, when has church orthodoxy failed the tradition or failed Christian believers? And so I think that image and for the mentioning Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, they offer very similar observations and land in very different places for their position as being Christian, but yet their critiques are extremely similar, and the observations they make are part of this tension. And I think that this is also a really significant part of your study and your methodology is really saying that, in what we call the mystical, that in religious studies is already a very complicated and dynamic phrase, but there's a way in which we need to engage with tradition that requires this tension. I mean, that's where I operate from, and I certainly, am also kind of a controversial figure in certain regards. But I think that the notion of understanding, and what you do in that Jesus as sign chapter is really significant, not just for understanding the Sufi reading of Jesus. And that was really the point that I was trying to make, that there are so many other figures who are asking those same questions from a very different vantage point.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah. So I also encourage our audience, now that we have so many questions and so many good ones, if you could upvote those you want answered first, because we will run out of time. Dr. Milani has been very generous. It's probably close to midnight where he is, right? It's about 10 minutes from midnight.
I got caught out by daylight saving, so
Okay.
it took me forward an hour. So we are at past midnight. Yeah.
Past midnight. Okay. So we don't want to keep him past the time. So if you can upvote the questions that you really want answered. So I see one now with 2 votes. That's the one I'll go to next. Okay, in Ghazali's work, it is said that the more the heart the more the heart's mirror and the knowledge held by man reflects that of God. So, okay, in other words, hearts can mirror the knowledge of God. That man is said to. Oh, I get it now. The more the heart mirrors God, the closer that person is to the divine, knowledge-wise. It is even described in Ghazali Sufism that man, through direct revelation, can achieve a nature or a state beyond angels. Yet Jesus, though he's affirmed to be one of the higher prophets, and here the person questioning very, very nicely cites 2 examples from the Quran that he's one of the higher prophets, he is at the same time said in the Quran to hold no divinity. And here also 2 verses from the Quran are cited to prove that he's not divine. So I'm confused. Is he not divine, or is he a prophet? That's the question.
Fantastic question. I think that's beautiful, and that's the crux of it. That's really that paradox, that tension, as Dr. Flanagan-Feddon was saying, is precisely the point, and that's kind of what I want people to sit with more and more. And as Dr. Flanagan-Feddon also very kindly pointed out in the chapters she referenced in my book, that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to sort of raise this question, but by way of discussing it through the mysticism of the Sufis. So if it's impossible to make some kind of a reconciliation or meeting point when you have differences of dogmatics between, say, Christian and Islamic tradition and theology, well, to me, the most obvious answer was, why don't we go to Sufism? Why don't we look at the mystics? And of course, Sufi mystics and Christian mystics come together so nicely, and that doesn't even need a book to explain it. It just works. Anyone who picks up any passage can see. But I think that tension is so important, And that question is so valuable to me. And that's one of, I mean, it is really the quintessential reason for my reading Surah Maryam and not anywhere else from the Quran. Because in that surah, what you have, it's an early surah, it's a highly valued surah. What you have is this kind of, that tension is in that surah. That you have someone who is divine and not divine. It clearly says he is from us. He is a word, holy son, virgin birth, a sign, but a man, not divine, a prophet. That's it, right? Now, if you are familiar with Christian theology, obviously you would know Nicene Creed settled this debate about Christology as Jesus being fully human and fully divine at the same time. So this is a very rich, complex creed. Many books have been written on it. Many debates still rage about it. And it was also the cause of divergence between denominations and breaks between traditions as well. So I think there's a lot to be said for sitting with that question, and I don't want to make it any easier than I've kind of already have, in a sense, if you like.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's excellent. So this might be our last question, depending on how, because I am going to keep to time. So this one is, in what ways are Jesus's miracles interpreted in Sufism? Are they viewed as symbols of inner transformation, or rather stages?
Yeah. Another great question.
Yeah, it is a good one.
Yeah. So again, I was trying to touch on that in the paper, in my introduction. Indeed, there's a risk in trying to make too much of Jesus's miracles in Sufi literature. So you might be pushing it too far to say that they're more than just symbolic metaphors, tropes, just ways of opening up and access to understanding, to insight. But at the same time, having said that, I will go so far as to say that I think that there is, and in the way that I worded it too, I was kind of careful in the way I worded it, to imply that I don't think that Sufism, this my I guess opinion, I don't think that Sufism is shy about Jesus having performed miracles, and I don't think that that is a problem. My reading of it, again, I do not see that the Sufis see this as a problem, that Jesus performed miracles literally, as because of the fact, I mean, if we want to rationalize this theologically within the Islamic context, simply because of the fact that Jesus is what he is and does what he does by the power of God. As I read that quote, Hafez, that line from Hafez, if the Holy Spirit would grace us again, anyone can do what Jesus had done. Others could do what Jesus had done. And in fact, this is what happens in after Jesus' ascension, the Pentecost. The Holy Spirit descends upon the apostles, and they can then do many things. So there's this continuity. So here, Hafez's line is very important because of that very fact that I think Sufis understand that the question is not Jesus per se, the question is the power of God through Jesus and through the work of the Holy Spirit. And I think there, again, is a great bridge between the two traditions to discuss theologically and unpack, obviously with problems that would be in footnotes.
Part two.
Dr. Milani, Dr. Flanagan-Feddon, any final thoughts you'd like to share? We have about 4 minutes left. I don't think we'll have time for a question, but if there's anything you'd like to say to wrap things up, first, so the final word can go to Dr. Milani. Dr. Flanagan-Feddon, was there anything left that you wanted to say, or?
No, the only other, again, I worry that this will take us too far afield. I had a quick Heideggerian question,
Oh,
just
okay.
about your methodology, and that you link your treatment really to on the origin of the work of art, but in so much of this discussion, I couldn't help but thinking of the question concerning technology, that there's that a lot of this discussion of kind of mystical and systematic and understanding tradition versus orthodoxy is also seems so relevant to the idea of being concerned about in framing or kind of sort of kind of a challenging forth of being that is part of this tension that we're trying to figure out, that the reason we have to, or the reason that it's incumbent on us to consider what these symbols mean is because we're constantly going back and forth between understanding what those parameters mean. And so much of that, I think, is also what is part of his critique of technology, is that kind of imposing a world and imposing or forcing being to be revealed in a certain way. And that is part of this, understanding the significance of divinity and humanity, understanding, practice versus institution. I saw so much of that also present in other Heidegger's of works as well. And I was just curious why you chose On the Origin of the Work of Art as your main focus.
Wow. I mean, I am channeling The Origin of the Work of Art, and it's one of my favorite pieces by Heidegger. And also the question of technology, concerning technology. And I chose, obviously, for the very reasons that you say. I mean, they inspire me. I mean, when I read again Heidegger, and sat with him longer and reflected on what he was talking about and thinking about the content that I know so well, which is Sufism, there was just a flood. There was a flood. And that's how the book really came about, because I was really grappling with the questions that Heidegger was raising. So in fact, my methodology is underpinned by in particular by what Heidegger does in Origin, and the work of art, and the way that he frames that, and the way that he uses that concept to convey so much more than we can take away. And that's kind of what I tried to do here with Jesus in this context of Sufism, sitting between two major traditions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, again, I can't underscore enough how significant I think that is, again, for so much of other analogs in Christian philosophy of religion as well. So I think it's truly fascinating.
100%. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you've done so really beautifully, and we appreciate it. Anything, Dr. Milani, you'd like to say or add, or?
Just great thanks to both of you, Dr. Zargar and Dr. Flanagan-Feddon, for hosting me and inviting me to be part of your brilliant show. I'm really excited. It's a great honor. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
the honor was all ours, and I mean, you probably can't see them, but we've gotten so many positive responses in the Q&A. Great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions, but thank you for joining us, Dr. Milani, and for everyone else. We'll keep announcing these podcasts as we have them, but you can email either myself or Dr. Flanagan-Feddon about future content you'd like covered. Our email addresses are, you can just Google us, but mine is just zargar@ucf.edu. And thank you, everyone. And that's it. Have a nice day. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.